Revenue per session is the neglected metric in the back of a shoebox in the back of your garage that everyone's not sure what to do with, how to make it useful. So they kind of keep it around, they put it in the shoebox, and they put it in the back of the garage. Let's bring this to the front of the conversation and talk about how to use revenue per session to drive your improvements over time. This is really applicable when you use split testing, but also just applicable to iterative tested over time. Are you doing better than you were last year or last quarter in comparison to where you are now? So let's talk about revenue per session. I'm going to show you a dashboard first, and then we're going to talk the strategy of how you can share this with your teams and the rest of your agencies or whoever you're doing is saying, let's drive this metric in the right direction. So here is my screen. We are looking at something very simplistic, right? We have sessions, revenue, revenue per session. So what that is right, divide these by 2, et cetera, et cetera. You should have revenue per session there. What we are looking then is we have this broken down by time. So we're comparing this to the previous year, right? So here we have this week versus the previous year in the same exact week. What you can see is that we are now driving more revenue per session for this brand. So it's increased by $1. The percentage increase, we could look at that at a different time. But the goal is that you are driving more revenue per session over a longer period of time. This can be through adding upsells. This can be through just being more efficient on your site as far as driving sales. This can be having a more direct response offer that you can have people buying immediately within the session. We then have some things broken down here by traffic source, landing page, and we can look at those from a revenue per session standpoint of how well is organic versus email versus referral. And here you can see an email driving a high revenue per session for this luxury item at $41 per session. So every session that comes to their site from email in general is $41. Okay, now that we have that kind of to set the scene here of revenue per session, let's talk through the strategy of why we even need this metric in general. So here we are looking at a little diagram here of a revenue per session. So here we have our sessions and here we have our revenue. And so the goal of every session here, folks, is that we drive revenue. Not every session, right? Different campaigns are going to have different outcomes. Different sources are going to have different use cases. But at the highest level, if we take the entire store and we say, how many sessions did we have this day, week, month, etc., and how much revenue did we have this day, week, month, etc., removing one thing that's important is we want to get rid of recurring orders. So we want to say less recurring orders. That is really important because we want to get rid of recurring orders from our revenue because that is not from your site, right? They don't have to you don't have to incur in session to drive revenue. So once we have this revenue per sessions, we're going to start at a high level. And let me just put some numbers on the page so that we can have something here. Let's just say we had revenue of $100,000. So here we go with $100,000. And let's just say we had sessions of let's just go with 10,000 sessions. Okay. So the quick and dirty math here is if we have $100,000 in revenue, we can then divide that by 10,000 and we get $10 per session. Ta-da, $10 per session. So this right here is then $10 per session. Okay. So overall, our store of Super Cool Widgets Incorporated is driving a $10 per session RPS. What we want to do is we want to then ask our buy questions down here, our buy questions. This is where you start layering in your strategy of where you're trying to go and say, hey, what's the useful breakdown that we need to know? I already showed you looking at something week by week, year over year, right? So we have every week or how are we doing, and then comparing that to the previous year's week of that same time. So now we can say, hey, are we generally doing better as driving more revenue per session? And how efficient are we at actually driving that? So we already broke this down by week, right? And by year. The next thing we want to look at is possibly traffic sources, right? And so this is where you can look at, for example, your traffic sources as a whole. You usually will have something kind of to the effect of email and paid ads and organic what I would suggest is that you just take all these traffic sources, get them out of the way, and let's look at one. And let's just look at our paid Facebook. All right. So we know we're spending money and we can drive a revenue per session. And so if we can maintain a revenue per session that is fairly consistent over a period of time. So say we have, for example, our revenue per session is $10 for Facebook ads, which if you do have that, awesome, good on you. That means, in general, our back of the envelope math here of $10 per session, we can drive a click or a session for $10 and we'll break even. Like back of the envelope math, that's the goal. Because our paid ads are currently doing $10 per session. And as like over time, we are then able to drive that revenue up and up. What you can then do is you can layer on some fancy pantsiness of maybe some CRO or order bumps, right? So say we add on some CRO plus new offers. And now what you're looking at, right? So we've layered this on, and so we bump this from $10 to $12 at our revenue per session. But we kept our ad buying at the exact same level. Well, now you're able to say, okay, we have this many clicks. We're spending $10,000 per day on Facebook ads. We are driving X number of clicks. Let's just say $1 per click. So now we have $1 per click, and let's just say 90% or 80% of those are actually going to hit. So it ends up being $2 once a person's on the page. You are now making $8 per session because that is the difference between those two. And so once it's like one of the most leading indicators of saying, okay, if we add in new offers, new upsells, new efficiency of the entire site, this revenue per session is going to be the most leading indicator for us because we know if we have this amount of revenue coming down by this traffic source over this period of time, that's the goal. Now, what you can do is layer this in over lifetime, right? So now you can say, okay, revenue per session is $12. The lifetime value of Facebook ads over say 60, 90, 180 days is what? Is let's just say it goes up by 30% in 90 days because you have a great product, people want to buy again in 90 days. So let's just say it increases by 30%. Well, now your $12, right, has increased by 30%. So let's just say I'm making this math quite difficult on myself. That's $4, so it goes to $16. So now you have $4 of extra revenue on top of that. And so looking at this from an optimization standpoint of if you're trying to break even on your first order or what you're trying to lose money and get that 30% margin on the back end, the goal of how you use revenue per session is remarkably simple. Is you're taking the number of sessions and the amount of revenue and you're breaking that down by different traffic sources. Not every traffic source is going to have the same apples to apples comparison because some are meant to drive more revenue, some are meant to drive less and more engagement. But you can look at that at a high level, the entire site, break it down by traffic source, break it down by week. But you can also break it down by offer, right? So if you have different offers, my personal favorite is breaking it down by landing page. And so that landing page function will give you a great idea of if you have the traffic source and the landing page, you now have a methodology to say, is this revenue coming at an efficient rate from a conversion value? And it is tied more to dollars. One of the biggest problems people have with conversion rates is they are so arbitrary, right? Revenue per session is usually something that can be very well guided, right? You have your revenue and you have your number of sessions. Whereas conversion rate is like, oh, are we looking at purchases? Are we looking at first-time purchase conversion rate? Or looking at conversion rate by X, Y, and Z? It just becomes more convoluted. Whereas revenue per session, people can oftentimes get their head around much, much faster. So that is revenue per session. And if you have any questions at all, leave a comment down below or contact us. Go to visionlabs.com/e-commerce. We'd love to help you out.